Hi everyone, and welcome to your daily oracle reading. The challenge: Explorer of Air. Now, naturally, the air element symbolizes the mind, the intellect, our cerebral activities, and since it is an explorer, it tells the story that our minds, our mental spheres are trying a little bit desperately to come up with solutions, with plans, with ideas. Of course, for some, it's not that much about ideas, but basically to calculate the future, to foresee, to anticipate what is about to happen so that we are prepared. For others, still, it's not even about the future, but rather the present. We're just trying really hard to come up with new solutions, new ideas, to work exactly with what they have. But in either case, outer limitations, the way the world, society, and the present moment, social distancing is and how it's affecting our lives is making this really difficult. Because in order to think properly, in order to think clearly, in order to try to use the very best expression of rationality and logic, we need to be at least a little bit in a comfort zone. This doesn't mean physically or materially, but at least, our beings have to be somewhat in a comfortable state in order to think properly, in order for our thoughts and our thought processes to serve our greatest good, because thinking and contemplating and rationalizing doesn't just involve the mind doing it on autopilot, but rather a communication between us and our minds. And that's why the symbolism of the explorer is so relevant, because we are trying to explore our minds. And since our lives are so limited from so very many different elements, from so many different perspectives, in so many different ways, well, then we have to tap into the unexplored, the unknown parts of our minds, because that is where the genius energy lies. That is basically why we're brainstorming, so maybe we can somehow access that part of the mind or the mental sphere of our intellect, which is even alien to us, but we know that the potential is there. We know that we haven't used the full potential of our intellectual reservoirs. So that's why we're digging, exploring, trying to make sense, trying to embody our inner genius, so to speak. It is the symbolism of Aquarius. We're trying to tap into our Aquarian energies and see if it can help us. Of course, some people do it intentionally because they know that Aquarius is so activated in the present moment, while for other people it's just out of instinct because they know, they just feel, and they just know without any higher reason that this is where the power lies in the present moment, in the mind, in the thoughts, in the plans, in the intellectual aspect of life. But since this is in a challenge position, it definitely speaks about the shadow expression of this card, which is exploring, digging deep with desperation, with the sensation that we are missing out on so many things. It maybe represents overdoing it, not allowing the mind to work on its own pace, but rather we're stressing it, we're forcing it, we're just using this resource in a kind of abusive way because we are frightened. Of course, this doesn't mean paranoid fears, this doesn't mean the basic fears, this just means that there is a great uncertainty in our lives and in the future, so we can definitely not ignore that. Because yes, we have everything under control. Yes, we trust ourselves, we love ourselves, we support ourselves, no problem at all. But that doesn't mean that our survival and our well being is 100% guaranteed. Because partially it depends on outer reality, it depends on the global social structures and what is going on in on the world stage, so to speak. So even if the universe is like directly with us, inside of us, around us, well, it all the universe is also responsible for everything else, not just for our own happiness. So it always has to balance it out, and which means that many times we cannot have our ways, or many times we have to wait on for that, big epiphany or miraculous solution, or the big opportunity that we are trying to so desperately not just to figure out, but to attract in our lives. Because the Explorer of Air definitely represents that we are also using our minds in a more metaphysical way, if that makes sense. We're actually trying to manifest with it, and as I said earlier, with or without expressively knowing that we're doing this, we're still trying our hardest to do something, to work with what we have, to create the future that we would like to experience. But this isn't like the Neptunian type of creation where we just give a green flag to the imagination, to the fantasy, and it can be whatever it wants it to be. No, this has to respect, physical reality. It has to respect the probabilities of the future. So this is definitely not fantasy and imagination. This is just trying to plan for the future in an optimistic and self-empowering way, but that doesn't mean tapping into idealism and overdoing it. So this requires a certain balance. This requires a certain self-discipline, which in the present moment can be really hard to obtain, because if we're brainstorming, well, that also means that we're overthinking, that we have to filter it, we have to discard all the things that do not resonate with us, we have to discard all the bad opportunities or not the ideal opportunities, what is and what isn't possible. So this can be very stressful, this can consume a lot of energy, which you might be feeling at night time when you have to rest, when you have to relax, where your mind just blanks out or shuts itself out. So you might feel every single night that you're disconnected from yourself, that all your inner work was actually counterproductive because it didn't unite you with your being, it actually separated you. So this kind of leads us to the situation where there's no an easy solution, or there is no way to overcome the challenge of this card. The only option that we have is just to go with the flow and try not to let this consume us too much, or better said, let's try our best not to let this drive us into crazy mode. Because ultimately, when overthinking is excessive, when we whip our minds into submission, it never has a very pleasant ending. It always drives us either into anxiety, either into a mental breakdown, or if the stress is getting to us, it will definitely attack our digestive tract. So it can also lead to physical problems. So the only way to overcome the challenge of this card is to go with the flow and try our best to keep ourselves in a state of balance, but we must also accept the truth that if imbalance comes, well, then it comes. There is nothing we can do that much about it, because we aren't in a situation where we can just do whatever we feel like at any given moment. So we cannot just take a break and escape into nature and recharge ourselves. Or for some people, solitude and just having a quiet moment is not an option. So we need to just come up with solutions every single moment of every single day. When we face challenges, when we face that fatigue, when we face overthinking, this is basically the only thing that we can do. This is our only solution right now. But all of this, of course, is leading us to the opportunity, which is the tree. The tree is the hanged man in classic tarot. So it definitely symbolizes both our inner Neptune, but also our inner Uranus. But since this is the opportunity, we're not actually looking at the negative expression of the card, but rather the positive one. And this is where that inner Uranus and Neptune, Uranus being the ingenuity of the mind, while Neptune being the non-linear intelligence or the non-linear logic of the soul, which, if they work together in perfect harmony, on one hand, yes, they absolutely distance us from physical reality. They cause us to, you know, burst into altered states of consciousness, which might not have to do that much with external reality, but still, since this is the opportunity, if this is what is going on with you, if you feel a very powerful inner call to just escape from physical reality deep into your own being, well, that is definitely a good idea, because on one hand, it keeps you safe, it prevents your mind from attacking you, and at the same time, it also prevents you from accessing your mind abusively. So this keeps a state of harmony. It is almost like a very profound meditative state. And on the other hand, disconnection, even when you're disconnected from, different parts of your being, is perfectly natural, because as above so below. If external reality is facing a big divergence, if it's facing very powerful disconnections and separations, well, that is mirrored inside of you as well. So sometimes it is actually a good idea to allow your mind to work as it wishes, to allow your emotional world to work separately as it wishes, to allow your subconscious to run its healthy programmings, and at the same time, your attention, your focus can just sit back and detach from the rest of your being and just preserve yourself in a meditative state where you allow the other components of your being to just do their jobs and balance themselves out. So, yes, absolutely, this brings you into a state of the hangman where you're just detached both from what's going on in physical reality around you, but also from your own inner processes. But that detachment actually connects you to source. It actually connects you to the divine mind. It starts feeding your inner spark, and that always leads you to powerful realizations, powerful epiphanies, maybe tapping into the future intuitively and just knowing that everything is gonna be okay in your life. Maybe the divine mind, so to speak, is simply going to comfort you and let you know one way or another you don't really have to worry about anything because it has everything figured out. Your situation, at least your life, your own individual personal story, is definitely going to be playing out in an empowered and divinely guided way. So you have all the reasons to relax, you have all the reasons to just keep your hangman state, because you're in absolute safety and your future is guaranteed by the divine intelligence. Now, there is also an additional opportunity which this card offers, and this opportunity might be pretty much the same for everyone, because this hanged man state, this state of detachment and really powerful inner contemplation, which happens on a soul level, because as I said earlier, different aspects and different components of your being are separated and are operating their own way at the same time. And since this is causing an altered state of consciousness, when you enter into it, you might not even realize that you're a human being. You might not even realize that you have a human identity and you have to function socially and whatever in that very weird or unusual state of being when you're just are yourself, when you're just your divine spark and nothing more. That is when you truly meet yourself. That is when you can truly observe yourself from the standing point of an outsider, of an observer. Because if everything inside of you is disconnected, of course, not in a chaotic and frightening way, but they're just doing their jobs, so to speak. Your mind, your emotional world, your subconscious, your superconscious, everything is doing their own work, their own roles, so to speak. So the core of your being, observing all of this and seeing yourself in a way that you could never actually observe and see yourself before, because you'd be too immersed in life. Even if that life is just superficial, it still requires somewhat of your presence. So this state is a perfect opportunity to not just to get to know yourself, because you already know yourself, even if not very profoundly, but you're still familiar with yourself and your own being. So this is where you can get actually comfortable with yourself and your own being. This is when you realize, when you have that inner realization that, life and earthly existence and everything else is actually somewhat of an illusion. It is actually somewhat holographic, and it all depends so very much on your perception, because that is what creates your own sense of reality from a human perspective. When you're just a divine spark, well, reality can be much more complex, but at the same time, much more simpler, because if the universe is in a constant state of flow, then you're basically just a traveler, and nothing is rigid, nothing is like extremely stable, everything is just a constant shift, everything is just a constant flow of energies, flow of time, flow of cycles. So that means that pretty much you have nothing to really worry about, because no matter what happens in your physical life, in your human life, it's just a big flow, and the flow means it can change at any given second. And that means problems, that means limitations, like obligations, even bad relationships, even contracts, everything that could bind you down in life has a chance to just disappear one day on its own. So isn't it silly? Isn't it a consume of an unnecessary consume of energy to worry, to fear, to dwell on things which don't depend on you that much? And this is also a perfect opportunity to much better understand your human self, the human being that you are, because if you see that that human being is trying its best, it's trying its hardest just to make it in life and not live a selfish life, a self-centered life, if it, even the human being that you are, has all the intention to be aligned with the universe, to be aligned with other people, not to be a passive passenger on planet Earth and the solar system, so to speak. If you're actually trying to make something out of your existence, you're fighting for your passions, you're trying your very best to fulfill your role with maximum dignity and diligence and responsibility. Well, that moment when you can actually feel true soul level divine respect and admiration for the human being that you are. Because very many times when we're immersed in life, and there are so very many people we can compare ourselves with, we usually judge our human self, beat it up, we criticize it, we compare it, and we might not even know it, that if this criticism comes from the core of our beings, it's hurtful. It is like putting daggers in our own hearts. And isn't that actually an act of aggression? Isn't that actually a source of bad karma? If our bias, if our own judgment is directed towards the self, the human self, how can the human self defend itself from our divine sparks, from the aggression of the divine spark? Well, it can only fall into a deep depression, where that anger, where that dissatisfaction and rage is drowned by the depressive Piscean energy, so to speak. So, yes, the opportunity of the hangman isn't physical, it is deeply psychological and spiritual. But if we seize this opportunity, well, it can make all the difference, especially regarding the relationship we have with ourselves. And this is how we achieve true soul level respect for who we are and for our own efforts, for trying really hard to be to live a harmonious life, basically. Harmonious both with the divine, both with ourselves, and both with other people, and of course the flow of the universe. This leads us to the resolution, which is the hermit. Now, on one hand, the hermit represents the Virgo energy, so service to others, what we can contribute to the world. We're building up a legacy for the future generations, and all of us have to input our own individuality and uniqueness into it so that our memories, our current beings, the human that we are right now, become somewhat symbolically immortal, but at the same time, this powerful contemplation of the hanged man can also fill us with respect for ourselves. It can unite us with our human selves very, very strongly, which means, are we gonna ever need the help, support, compassion, love, mercy, pity of another human being? Or do we enter a state where when we have ourselves, we have absolutely everything that we need, and we can be perfectly happy with ourselves and with our lives just the way it is, as much as we can provide for ourselves? And this leads us to the state where if we are that okay with the self, then everything else is just the bonus. A thank you, an appreciation, an offer of friendship, an offer of kindness, love, whatever that might come from another person and from the external reality is just a big bonus. It is actually a divine gift that we can appreciate, because if we don't need it, if we don't need it obsessively, if we do not seek it obsessively, if we do not live for it, well, then it is a very pleasant surprise, and it's gonna delight us, surprise us, make us be our most appreciative and our most grateful selves each and every time something beautiful happens to us. May it come from another person, may it come from the divine, may it come from groups of people, whatever. That is the key to true soul level gratitude, when you're so okay with yourself, when you're so okay both with the divine spark, your skills, talents, every blessing in your life, but most importantly, when you can truly appreciate the human being who you are, because the human being is who is doing the work, the human being is who is suffering, because as Buddhists say, isn't earthly life, earthly incarnation about pain and suffering more than anything else? Because that ennobles us, that teaches us the lessons, that makes us be receptive to how other people are feeling and living, and ultimately, isn't that the path to enlightenment? So, yes, we owe so much to the human being that we are, because it is that human who is going through the hardships and doing the best they can to succeed, to please the universe, to please its own soul, to please its own higher self, to please other people, and ultimately to please collective consciousness. So, the moment when we can truly appreciate who our human selves are, now that is when we are going to find true self-love, true acceptance, true optimism and faith. For that is the moment when we truly realize that we are a universe within another universe, and everything that comes from the external universe is a gift. It is a blessing. Even the simple fact that the outer reality is aware of us is a miracle in itself. And imagine if very, very many people feel the same way, if very, very many people discover this big truth and they embody it. Well, isn't that basically the foundation of a future in the age of Aquarius? That the most beautiful expression of humanitarianism and interhuman connections, where we actually give our very, very best selves to the human collective, and through this we definitely write our own futures. Well, thank you so much for listening. Wish everyone a safe and blessed day. Bye for now.